Assalamu alaikum. This is Ali Farooq again from Dallas, Texas. We are here at Ghamidi Center and we're talking with Dr. Shehzad Saleem. We had some really good, interesting historical background on Al-Mawrid, on Dr. Shehzad Saleem, but also introducing the great scholars, Javed Ahmed Ghamidi Saab and his teacher, Amin Hassan Islahi Saab, and also his teacher, Hamiduddin Frai Saab. Shehzad bhai, I just wanted to continue from there because we talked about your journey and we kind of, automatically brought us, fortunately, a lot about Al-Mawrid history. And it's great to hear that there's 100 years of background there. So before, and I would love to jump into your PhD, which is a very important topic for this. But before that, I wanted to understand a bit more from you about Javed Saab, about your relationship with him. How do you find him as a person? And and his effort to this cause and his effort of learning. So what do you have to say?
Well, I think that one of the things that inspire me most about Ghamidi Saab, there are several things that I can say, but I remember one slogan, it's like a one-liner, which his teacher once told him, and I think he's the best example of what he told him in that respect. So Islahi Saab once said that, abide by the truth, even if your shadow deserts you. I think it's a beautiful literary statement. So abide by the truth even if your shadow deserts you. And I found that my Ustaz, Amin Hassan Islahi, of course, himself was a very huge exponent. And because I didn't get to see him much, so I can relate much to him. But what I can say is that my own teacher and our teacher, he is a very good example of the fact that to abide by the truth and even if your shadow deserts him, it really works for him. And so one of the things that has really inspired me is that his commitment to the truth, his commitment to the cause of the truth, regardless of what people might say. So in his journey, he has stuck to many ideas, given them up, and then researched and found some new ideas, and etc. So his intellectual journey has been this journey of accepting the truth wherever it would come from. And I do remember on several occasions that at times some of the ordinary questions which ordinary people like us would ask would actually induce him to rethink a lot of his presentations, and he would revise his presentations, and he would think that perhaps another angle would be even more precise to present whatever he's presenting. And so he has this tremendous thirst, I would say, to find what the truth is, and he would not have any qualms. He would not have any regrets whether he believed something in the past and now he's giving that up. Because you see, at times this is like something which becomes a part of your ego as well, that I was believing in something and I was telling my students and so many people that this is how I share my ideas, and suddenly one fine morning I find that I no longer subscribe to them and I go in a different direction. So I think his biggest contribution in this regard is that his commitment to the truth has never wavered. And as a byproduct of this, I think the thing or the sole thing which a person like me, and I can vouch for many of my colleagues as well, which have made us still stick to him is the fact that we can differ with him with ease. So he does not require any blind following or any taqleed, or he would never say that, well, if this is his opinion, that we are bound to follow his opinion. He would express his opinion in the form of arguments and leave it to us to decide. And I have many colleagues of mine who still have some basic differences with him, but they're still going along with him as his students because they think that they can breathe fresh in spite of having a difference of opinion with him, and even in the case of certain basic issues. So I think the byproduct of this quest for the truth was that he let us also stick to the same slogan, that you abide by the truth that you think is dear to you. So each one of us, I would say, is blessed in this way, that all of us have this leverage, this freedom that we can pick and choose. Of course, not with any bad intention, yes, but with sincerity that what we think is correct. And the second contribution that I think that he has made in our lives is the fact that he has always stressed that knowledge is always secondary. Knowledge is always secondary. First comes your character, especially morality, the fact that you have to hold a good conduct in life, you have to be a good person in life, you have to be a good human being in life, you have to be a good father, a good husband, a good brother, all relationships with you must be honored first. And people should vouch for you that when you leave this world, you don't leave their hearts. You might leave this world, but you don't leave the hearts of people. So the second thing that he really encouraged or really I would say personally took a lot of emphasis upon, was that he would always tell us that life is primarily this test of morality, this test of your own conscience, this test of your own, the way that you would conduct yourself in life. And probably the third aspect that I would add here would be that he would always encourage discussion and debate. And in fact, not only encourage that, he would go to great lengths to listen to our, at times, totally absurd jargon and absurd talk, but he would still say that, okay, if this is how you feel or this is how you think, you keep doing what you think is right, but he would go to great lengths in trying to explain, and he would encourage people. And whenever you would knock at his door or you call on him and you say that I had a question and I don't understand what you have said, he would be the most responsive of people. He would always have the time for us to be given. And I do remember in my personal life so many incidents in which the next day, out of my turn, I mean, when I say out of my turn, it would mean that it was his work time. And I would call him and I said that the thing that you had said last night or maybe the day before doesn't make sense, and I'm really bothered about it. And he would leave his work aside and he would, call upon me. And I think the same is true for the rest of his students. So his commitment to the truth, his commitment to morality, and his commitment to this dialogue and discussion, these are the three towering aspects which I don't find, I mean, I'm not saying in a very disparaging way. Normally in religious circles, you don't find this. Because in religious circles, what happens is that you generally follow what the head of the circle or the head of the institute is going to do. And the second thing that you generally do is that you have to at times sacrifice your own conscience or your own ideas, because you think that there is someone who is superior to you, and maybe he's the right person who's on the right. So this never happened with us. We felt ourselves empowered. We felt ourselves individuals who could differ with him at the same plane and also present our work. And it was like a free-flowing communication. We never felt that we are sitting with a person who has a lot of knowledge, who is a towering personality in his own right. We always thought that he would come down to our own level. And it was like such an easy thing to talk to him always. And because of the fact that he always has a very lighter side to his personality, it's not just books and research. He also likes to go out. He has his own way of looking at nature. He's very fond of architecture. He's very fond of some of the scenery that he admires, like going in the northern areas, admiring and sitting in the rain, eating pakoras, etc. So the lighter side of his personality is also there, which makes communication to be very, very smooth and very, very fluent.
You're right, Shehzad bhai. I mean, it's a unique experience, and I second you, and it's great to know as well, because I've experienced Ustad Javed Ahmad Ghamidi being this well-rounded person, and typically he doesn't appear to be a typical religious scholar, and it does change the definition of a scholar in my mind, because I think you have to look at it academically, and and it's a process of research and verification, and of course you can change opinions, because once you research more, you find out something has changed, so you have to adapt to something what you've learned new, and then the students should be saying the same thing, and they cannot do it until they're able to challenge back, until they're able to question, until they're able to disagree, right? So it looks like that's the process.
So I think that if I sum up, he's someone who inculcated in us this power of critical thinking, critically evaluating things, not just taking things on their face, always trying to tell us that, and he would be very, very emphatic on the fact that if there was some critique published in a newspaper or in a journal or maybe on a TV channel, some person airing some critique, he would always tell us, and he would ask us the next morning, did you read the critique that such and such a person put forth? Because he wanted us to test ourselves against these critiques and to find out that maybe the person is speaking the truth and we need to go to that person. So his cause and commitment to the truth is so tremendous that even today, and even I face him, at times he would ask me that, have you read that person's ideas? Did you see how he has critiqued us? Do you have an answer to his critique? And because of the fact that I can admit for my own self at least, that being involved in specialized work, at times I do not get time to read other people's research or critique, because there's so many things that people are critiquing us. But I can tell you that he does read every single critique that is made on him or his approach. And we do lag behind, and many a time he would tell us that, go and read that book.
No, that's interesting, and to understand his way of doing work, and how he spent his life focusing on the truth, focusing on the character, being a well-rounded person, and helping you guys debate and enhance the critical ability so that the right answer can come. So that by let's just move on to your journey and with all of this background that we've understood on and moving towards the history of Quran. So what was the event that led to that, and then if you can explain the overall 5-6 years you spent in it, and I was amazed to see a lot of time probably you spent in Lahore while working on that
PhD, right?
That PhD.
So actually, the event that inspired me to do further research, and it was just a stroke of luck that I got the opportunity to do it in the form of a degree. Otherwise, I had made up my mind that I'll do it anyway, even if I don't take a degree. And the event was that I was called to teach. I just told you that we had a graduate program of Masters of Islamic Studies being taught at our at our institute. So the first batch that I taught was that, the subject I was called upon to teach was the Quran. And before teaching the text of the Quran, so we had to teach the introduction to the Quran. And introduction to the Quran meant that you would be required to teach about the language of the Quran, about the background, the structure, and the history of the Quran. And when I was preparing my notes, I thought that perhaps this section or this class or this session on the history of the Quran would be just 5 or 10 minutes, because what is the history of the Quran? Because we know that the Quran is a preserved book, and that's the end of that. So I just thought that I'll just sail through this and I'll talk about some other subjects as well. But when I started to prepare and I got to know about some of the questions which have arisen in the minds of so many people and which actually exist in reality as well, I was so disturbed and perturbed that not finding those answers, I just thought that I either had the chance of the opportunity to just skip teaching, or maybe just do that teaching and then do the research on my own personal part. So I said that, okay, what I'll do is that I'll try my best to teach this subject as best as I can, and in spite of being perturbed, and also raise the same questions before my students as well. And later on, I'll dedicate myself to find the answers to these questions. So this is an event of teaching the history of the Quran that actually made me realize that a lot needs to be studied, and there are a lot of unresolved answers that I thought, and they could not be presented to students in the wake of the raw material that we had, the material which was in such a raw form. So I finished, I think, teaching graduates these graduate classes in 2001. And immediately after that, I thought that I'll go on and do my research on this subject. So I just started my research when, by a stroke of luck, I also was able to register this research as a PhD degree. So this is how this whole event happened.
I see. So very interesting, because yes, I'm not sure if you've ever heard that anyone has spent that much time, and this is a great book. So can you tell us a bit more about your effort? Because finding the history of Quran is a daunting task, and you then have to eventually validate what you're saying, and eventually you have to make it representable in the world so that people can accept and start using that content. So can you explain us a little bit about the effort you had to put in place and what difficulties you had to go through?
So I think there were a couple of nagging questions which were unanswered to me by that time, and the gravest of those questions was that we had 4 Qurans in circulation in the Muslim Ummah. This still is the case, and so when I did my research, I later on came to realize that 97% of the people, or the population of the Muslim population, they read the Quran that we are and you and everyone is used to. But there is a 3% population occupying about 12 countries which have 3 different Qurans amongst themselves. And this difference is not just in pronunciation. The words are different, the tenses are different. There is a difference between singular and plural, the pronouns and the nouns. And this is a far cry from the fact that when we see the Quran telling us that the Almighty has said that I have revealed this Quran, Inna nahnu nazzalna zikra wa inna lahu lahafizun, and I am responsible for protecting and preserving it. So when I saw this, that for so many centuries there were other Qurans being read in North Africa, parts of North Africa, and also it was very, very disturbing for me to come to know that in Yemen also we had a different version. So remember, Yemen is the only country which was conquered in the time of the Prophet Muhammad himself.
Yes.
And Muaz bin Jabal was sent as his governor. So a country which was conquered in his own lifetime, in the lifetime of the Prophet, having a different Quran, and then North African countries, of course, like Algeria, Morocco, Mauritania, Sudan, Egypt, parts of Egypt, and then some other countries. So this is something that was really disturbing. And then, so the first thing that I did was that I actually went to Morocco to find out, and that was again a stroke of luck that I had someone, a cousin of mine living in Morocco, in Rabat to be precise, there. And it was precisely the same place where I needed to go to find out more about this. I again thought it was like a God-sent opportunity. So I wrote to him and I said that I'd like to come and stay with you. And he was staying at a place which was very close to the famous university called the Kairouan University, which is in Fez, which is slightly off Rabat. And this is one of the oldest universities and was set up in the 9th century. So, so I spent time there. I went there. I tried to find out the history of the Qurans, or the Quran that they read in their areas, and then I thought that I had found the answer, that there is this Quran that was implemented in the 3rd century, and ever since the 3rd century Hijrah, which is about, let's say, 1100 years, the same Quran is being read there, it is being taught there, it is being published there. And not only there, in the 70s or maybe in the early 80s, the Mujamma al-Fahad, the King Fahad complex, has actually published all these 5 Qurans which are in circulation. So they have published the Quran that we know of, and they have published all these other Qurans as well. So if a person comes from that territory to do Hajj or pilgrimage, he would be given a gift of the Quran that they would read in their own areas. So this is I think the biggest question that really startled me, that how come we have more than one Qurans, and not only just more than one Quran, our own Vatican, which is Saudi Arabia, they have published it. And when I went there to study, I came to realize that it is something that has been going on there for the past 12 centuries. So this is something that really, startled me, as I said. And by the way, these are very small words. I was literally shaken.
Yes.
And then there were other questions as well. For example, the way the history of the Quran has been narrated in history books, in our Muslim history books, which shows that it was perhaps haphazardly arranged. It was arranged in a fashion that people were in hastiness. And thus we have verses that were left out in the Quran, from the Quran. So we have we have hadith saying that some verses were left out of the Quran. And for example, we have the Rajam verse being said, about which it is said that it is part of the Quran, but it is not in the Quran. It is Mansukhut Tilawa Dunul Hukm, that the directive is valid, although its reading in the Quran is not there. And then, of course, there were other questions in the compilation of the Quran, the way it was being transmitted. And, of course, then the issue of variant readings. So, like these 11 countries were the countries in which the Quran was published in a different version, on a different version. But apart from that, we have this phenomena called variant readings, in which almost every single verse which is read, the way we read it, is also read in a different way. When I see it, so it's like a qiraat. I mean, it's not just the pronunciation; the words are different. So, difference between the variant readings and the being actually read in parts like North Africa is that in those places it was in vogue. It was actually being read in those territories. But the variant readings, they exist in our history books, in our tafsir books, in our hadith books, and our scholars say that if they conform to certain standards, they are as good as the Quran. You can read your prayer on that. And when I actually compared the Quran with those variant readings, I could find about 7 or 8, I would say, variant readings on every page. If I, for example, a normal 13 line Quran, you'll find almost every line having a different reading by different people, and that would typically be written on the margins. There have been books that have been published in which the Quran that we are used to would be published in between, and the variant readings would be published on the margins. So if there are, let's say, roughly about 600 pages to the Quran or 700 pages, I counted about, let's say, maybe at an average of 10 or 11 variant readings per page, which would amount to so many thousands of differences. So this is one area. And then we have another issue in which we found that companions like Abdullah ibn Masud saying that the last 2 surahs of the Quran, Surah Falaq and Surah Nas, they are not part of the Quran. They are basically supplications or du'as which the Prophet taught, and they have been erroneously inserted in the Quran. And we have a companion like Ubay ibn Ka'b telling us that the Dua Kunut, which we read in our witr prayer, it was part of the Quran, it is no longer there. And then we have arrangements of the Sahaba, arrangement of surahs of the Sahaba in a very different way. So we have the codices of Abdullah ibn Masud radhiyallahu anhu and Ubay ibn Ka'b. The arrangement has been transmitted to us. So these were the critical questions that popped up, and they were actually tackled by our Western academia much before we have even thought about them. And it's not that there were there was not any intellectual dishonesty on their part, because when they raised these questions, I think they were very genuine questions. So these genuine questions were raised by them, and they then tried to answer these questions on their own. And the Muslim scholarship, I think, instead of maybe discussing them with them or debating with them, they just gave a shut-up call to them, and they said that this is our business. You don't need to come up and have this debate with us. This is the Quran, and that's the end of that. I mean, it's more like imposing yourself that, well, this is our private business. So the discussion and debate between the Western academia and our Muslim scholarship initially was stalled. Later on, of course, it has now started, but it is far from, I would say, convincing in any way, because the classical stance of Muslim clergy, I would say, or our Muslim ulama, is that yes, the Quran, the versions of the Quran which are being read in those countries are equally correct. And even if they have slight differences, which of course, though may be slight, but there are instances in which they become grave as well. So we just cannot, come to grips with this question that how come the Almighty said that I'm going to protect the Quran, and then we have these variant readings and different Qurans as well. So I think this was such a big thing that had an impact on my life, that I think I dedicated about 15 years of my life from 2001 to 2015 to this quest. And so one part of my book, which I have published, was my degree, was my PhD thesis, and I think some postdoctoral work after that, which I did, I think, under the auspices of Al-Mawrid, also went into that. And so basically it's like an 8-year PhD and another 6 years of postdoctoral work that were combined in that book that I published. And I thought that maybe, and by the way, when I say that I published that book, it's not that I came up with these answers. Once again, I would say the basic answer was given by that giant Ustaz Amiruddin Farai. So my thesis and my study basically revolves around elaborating and expanding on his stance, the way he has presented it. And it has been further developed and elaborated upon by Amin Hassan Islahi and Ustaz Javed Ahmed Ghamidi. So my thesis or my book, I would say, is not something that I have come up with. Maybe I've made some slight contributions, but mostly it is an elaboration of the stance that they have presented it rather concisely, and also in the Urdu language or the Arabic language, and it's not available publicly. So it's like more of an elaboration of their stance.
So Shehzad bhai, I mean, this is amazing, and I'm hoping the audience is understanding the effort that Shehzad bhai had to put in place. But for me, if there is a religious scholar and they can pick up a topic, and in your life, this is probably one of its kind achievement anyway, that you picked up a very sensitive topic as well. And I know that recently I was even in Dallas, there's a discussion on variant readings. There's a talk about Qira, and then of course the various versions. So to study that and to be able to come to a conclusion based on, even if Hamiduddin Farai Sahab and Amin Hassan Islahi Sahab has a context behind it, but elaboration in itself is a big task, it's a daunting task, it's quite an achievement.
Well, I just still think there's a way to go for the research, but what I pray to God, it just opens the way to further discussion and research. And more than that, our traditional scholars, they open up their minds once again, or maybe revisit some of the stance that they have regarding the history of the Quran, because currently the history of the Quran, the way which is that they describe it, is absolutely not convincing, and it is a far cry, as I said earlier on, from the fact that the Quran has been preserved.
Shehzad bhai, we'll need to end the episode here. Everyone in the audience, this was a great story to learn and understand how one would dedicate 15 years of their life to understand the history and background, and to understand some of the loopholes, some of the questions that were left unanswered, and explain them in a book. I encourage everyone to go and read the History of Islam, the book that was published by Dr. Shehzad Saleem. It's available through Al-Mawrid US, is also available through Al-Mawrid Pakistan, and also through other mediums at Amazon as well. And I myself have the curiosity to know what were the answers, and I'm hoping you, anyone who's listening will have the same curiosity. Thank you very much. Thank you, Shehzad bhai.
Thank you very much.